If you're watching this video, it's because you want to restore one of these, a Panasonic RQ-SX model. Now these are all Panasonic RQ-SX models. They're all largely the same, except for these two outliers here. These are slightly earlier models with a single belt. All these other units in the middle have two belts. They're the most common ones. And I'm going to show you today how to take these apart, replace the belts, replace the clutch spring, and I won't show you how to change the main gear inside it, but I will show you where that is. This video is going to be quite long. It's going to be nearly an hour long. I will go through it in as much detail as I can. Hopefully, if you follow this instruction guide, you will have a working Panasonic RQ-SX at the end of the video. I'm going to just tidy all this away, and first up, I'm going to go over all the things you're going to need to repair one of these, because it's not like a Sony product where all you need is a screwdriver, maybe some cotton swabs and some alcohol and some new belts. These require a little bit of taking apart. So without further ado, I'll clean this up and we'll cut over to what you're going to need to get started. So now with that cleared away, first up, you want to have a bit of a workspace to work on. You need quite a bit of space because you're going to be taking a lot apart. I would say get a soft cloth for unfolding and working on top of. Makes life so much easier. So that's the first thing I'd say you'd get. Also a piece of tissue paper, kitchen roll. That works quite well as well. When you're using the solder pump, which I'm going to show you in a minute, there'll be lots of little bits of solder everywhere, and it's better collecting this and you can scrunch it up and throw it away after. So, unlike most other Walkmans that you have to restore, first thing you're going to need is a reasonable soldering iron. Now, I'm going to be using this at 340 degrees, I think it is. Some of the recommendations are 300 degrees. Some are just whatever. Now, with this particular solder iron that I've got here that I picked up from Amazon, I found 340 as kind of the sweet spot for it. So, as well as having that, you really want to get a decent solder pump. So, a lot of channels will use solder wick, which I've got some of that here as well. And you can get different thicknesses, and some of them work better than others, and some of them work on different types of stereos better than others. So what you do with these is you warm up the solder until it's molten, and then you press this against it, and you keep it warm, and it's absorbed into the metal weave. These are great, except sometimes, if you're not careful, and you lift the soldering iron too soon, this will stick, set solid to that solder point that you've just been desoldering. And if you lift it too quick, when it's just starting to set, you may lift off the pad on the board, and then your board's largely wrecked. So a solder pump, can't really go wrong with one of these. All you have to do, this is an iFixit one, just got this one recently, it's really good, this one I have to say, is you push the plunger down, it locks into place, you get your solder molten, and then you push the button to lift the solder off, and it just sucks it up inside the well. And when you press it out, give it a couple of presses, and you should find, well, you'll get remnants are falling out even long after the fact. But yeah, great thing. So you want a solder pump. You'll also need some solder, nothing too thick, nothing too thin. Actually, this is just budget stuff that you can get from Amazon, and it works a treat. I think it's got a flux core, yep. So, for cleaning up, you're going to need cotton buds, obviously, and some good quality isopropyl alcohol. As well as that, I recommend using toothpicks. So when you get the belts, the old belts which will have melted and they'll get stuck in the grooves, most people tend to go at them with just, cotton swabs or a screwdriver with a bit of cotton on the end of it and ram it in around the capstan gears and stuff. I would use a wooden toothpick instead, because these tend to, they break down before you damage any metal or plastic. They're softer. So initially, as you'll see in the video, I'll swab stuff down and I'll get quite moist with the cotton bud and the isopropyl alcohol, and then I'll get some isopropyl alcohol on the end of the stick, and then I'll use that just to help lever off any remaining bits of belt. It's much quicker for cleaning up. Next up, you're going to need, when it comes to putting it all back together, you'll also need to lubricate a few bits. So I recommend getting a light fan oil. So I'll show you in the video where to use this. I like to use a syringe where I just put some oil in this, and then it's much easier to put a precise drop in the places that it needs to go. And on top of this for lubrication, you also will need some white lithium grease, just from wherever you can get it. So this is just a 3-in-1 grease. This works pretty well. And I just spray it in the cap and use it from there. And I use a toothpick to put that on rather than using anything more bulky. The point of a toothpick is absolutely perfect. Now, before I finally cut over to the video, there's two other items that I've not mentioned that you will need. You'll need a decent set of screwdrivers. Now, I recommend an iFixit kit. This is the Moray, and also a couple of these, just guitar picks basically, for popping open the shell in places, and also I use these for popping the motor apart. So I've got two of them, I've got another one somewhere, but definitely have a couple of them. They're softer than the metal that you're working on, so these will tend to fail before you do any damage. With the Moray kit, the smallest Phillips and screwdriver work a treat with all the Panasonic RQ-SX models, and the smallest flathead will work pretty well for adjusting the tape speed if you have to do that at some point. I'm not going to cover that in today's video, but we may cover that in another one. And the last thing I would recommend is getting a little kit with a number of sets of different precision tweezers. These are actually quite cheap, and some of them are a little bit bent. Picked this up on Amazon as well, and what I'll do is I'll put links in the description below for all the parts I've used today. I haven't included the belt. I don't have a spare set of belts with me just now, so you need to get a belt set. I would recommend you go to Manatree or buy a Deck Tech set of belts. You can buy them from AliExpress. I've had some good success with that. But if you're doing this in a single model and you want to keep it, go with a Deck Tech set of belts. The gear, there is two options. Fix Your Audio do a brass gear, which is really good quality. Comes with a different washer to lock it in place. Very good quality. But there's also Chinese alternatives from AliExpress. Those come in plastic, and they're actually okay. There's also a gear, which I'll point out in the video. I've had quite good success in restoring these units, and don't usually find this gear's broken. But if yours is broken, you can buy a metal replacement rather than plastic for about £8 from AliExpress, and I'll link that in the link description as well. Okay, over to the video, and let's get this restoration on the road. So here we have it. This is my Panasonic RQ-SX 55. This is the more premium end of the RQ-SX model line, and as you can see, this one is in near perfect condition. There's two scratches in the front, and there's no corrosion in it. Everything is just absolutely spot on, but it doesn't play. So if I put a battery in here and show you, you will see that if I just try and find the switch, and I've just realised it's not one of the little ones, it's on the front of the case. There's a tape sensor switch on these, and if you hold that in, you will see that the gear is not turning. So yep, this needs belts. So we'll get that battery out, and what we'll do is we will grab our iFixit kit and our tools that we need today. I'm kind of bigging up the iFixit kit solder pump because I just got that from the start of this video. I've been using a cheaper one, and it worked fine until it failed. But yep, today we're switching over to an iFixit solder pump. So the way I like to take these apart is I like to take the side screws out first. So I like to do the sides, and I store them in the lid of the iFixit kit. So I like to just put these in the middle. This is just my way of doing it. You don't have to copy this. You can do what you like. But yeah, I take out the side screws first, then I move on to the bottom screws. The bottom being the side that's not the eject opening side. So I take them out next and put them to the left. This just keeps me right, because what I've noticed with the Panasonic RQ-SX line is, generally speaking, the middle screws, the ones on either side, are always the same length. The top and bottom screws are generally the same length on that one side, but sometimes the longer screw can be on the bottom of the case, the longer screws, sorry, and sometimes it can be on the top of the case. It just depends on the design a little bit. They do change a bit. So what I like to do here is I like to put all the switches to the right and put the hold in place, and that's so that when you lift the lid, if you just pop the battery cover off, you should be able to lift the lid up, a little bit of lever in, and lift it up towards where the switches are. There's always switches near the earphone socket. Usually it's a hold switch. Sometimes on the more premium ones, a hold switch is in the middle of the case. And as you notice there was a bit hanging off there. That was that's the clutch spring and clutch retainer. Now it popped off, so I just take them off because they will fall off and invariably get lost. Now as you can see, the motor, I'm trying to turn it there loosely with my finger, it's not turning. It's locked solid. So chances are there's remnants of a belt there and it's stuck it in one place. So we'll put a battery in. We'll open up the shell carefully. Watch, because the hinges may pop out at this point and the shell will fall apart quite a lot. But as I hold down the tape sensor, you can see the motor is trying to move this. It's jiggling from side to side. So that lets me know that this is definitely going to be fixable. It's just a simple case of getting to the belts. And as you can see, You can't see the belts on these models. You have to take out 5 screws. Generally speaking, most of these models have got 5 screws in exactly the same places. You've got bottom left, top right, in the middle of the unit, top right and top left, bottom right. However, I have encountered some where there's only 3 screws. Now, it's important you take them all out. They're always in roughly the same location, even if it's just a 3 screw model. That would be one in the bottom left, one in the bottom right, in relation to the battery, and one in the kind of middle, near the top. So they're always in the same place. So take all of them out. And even when you've taken these out, you've only just started really, because the board is still well and truly stuck fast because it's soldered in place. So there's 3 tabs here. That's for the tape sensor, two solder points there for the servo, one there for the earth, and then these ones along here for the motor control. And I always take this end one off as well as best I can because it sometimes sticks there a bit. So next up, you want to get your soldering iron, which will be up to temperature by now. And yeah, I'm using 340 degrees. That works well with this soldering iron. My previous one I used to use about 320, and you want to use your solder pump. So I'll just get that primed and ready to go. What I like to do is heat up the solder and then just press that right down. The plastic on the end is kind of a harder type. It doesn't melt. It's a high melting point, so you get pretty close with it. And even if you do some damage to it, you're not going to close up the end of that solder pump. So as you see here, this is unmolested, old solder. It just melted really quickly there. You're only a few seconds at each area. And the reason I use a little bit of kitchen roll, like I'm doing here, is I can just tip the pump out of the side and all the little remnants of solder can land on that piece of paper and we can scrunch it up and throw it in the bin later. Now, these 2 solder points here for the servo, I try to be as quick as possible doing these because the pins that you're soldered onto tend to sink into the actual body of the servo. Now, it can be recovered. You can warm them up and pull them back out a bit, but if you're just quick, you'll do no damage. Okay, and as you see, I'm not spending really much time on this. If you're using a solder wick, you generally tend to have to heat the solder up until it's molten, then put the solder wick into it, then try and lift it off. That's quite time consuming. You might have to, if it gets stuck, you might have to heat it again, and I find this tends to damage the pads over time. And you really don't want to do that in the solder pads because these Panasonic RQ-SX models, you may have them apart a few times. Now, hopefully we get lucky with this one today, but only time will tell. And as you can see, using the solder pump, I'm getting every bit of solder off there that I need to get off. The pins are sitting proud in the solder points there, so I can get them out pretty quickly. So we're only about, what, 13-14 minutes into this main part of the video, and already we're ready to take the board off. So sometimes if you're not lucky, you might find that a little bit of solder still stuck, as I'm finding just now. So all you need to do is get your solder iron, just warm up a little bit of solder, be ready to lift it. So I like to use my thumb against the earphone socket, just apply a little bit of pressure, and there you go, it'll just pop up. There we go, that's it popped off. And one of these other points is still sticking, there you go. That's it jumped off. So you'll notice that the battery door has fallen off there, that's fine. Just put that to one side safely, and most people just tend to work on these with the cable still attached, but I like to just pull it free and put the main board out of the way for safekeeping. And there you have it, we're now in. It's not so complicated, and as you can see straight away, when I put this torch on, and I'll shill this Woobin torch, it's really good. As you can see, when I'm turning the gear here, the gear I'm actually touching just now, that little one in the middle, is one that's prone to failure. So, or at least it's reported online it's prone to failure. I've only had a couple fail. And to remove them, it's a little bit more in depth. And we're not going to go into that today. I may do a separate video on how to change that gear at a later date. So, yep, set of tweezers, just lift off the belts as best you can. Sometimes you might get lucky and they might come away in chunks. Like this one's actually coming away in one piece, but it's very, very, very gooey. So I've got kind of lucky there. One thing you will notice on this SX55 model is that right capstan is much bigger. That golden part that I've just pulled the belt off of, much bigger than you get on a lot of the other RQ models. I'm not really sure why. Probably because it's a more premium model and has a really fast forward. Anyway, spend a bit of time picking off these bits of belts as best you can. It's not all off, as you can see on the right there. That is the larger of the 2 belts. The smaller of the belts it always just ends up inside the motor, generally wrapped around the motor. So the easiest way I've found is to completely remove the motor from the unit rather than trying to work on it in situ. So you have to take off this large soft plastic circlip from the top. So I find holding it down with one finger at one edge and then just getting a set of tweezers on it and pushing it around helps lift it off pretty quickly. So next up, there is 3 screws. They're very short screws that hold in the motor, so you take them off. And I like to put them in a little safe area of the inside of the iFixit case lid as well. So once you've got these 3 screws out, you will be able to lift the entire motor assembly away from the personal stereo. So I just lift it up and it'll come away. And there we have it. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit more room just now because I don't have a lot of room to work here. That's why I suggest you have as much room as possible. Now the main part of the motor, the part that's energized with electricity, you can just slide that straight out, put it to one side. And now this is when we get the 2 picks to pop open the motor. So it's literally 2 magnets that are holding each other together, attracted together, and we're just going to pop those apart in a second. So I like to put one pick in one side, one pick in another, and just twist them in opposites, and you generally get the motor apart really easily then. And as you can see, there's a bit of gunge stuck to one side of the motor, and round the actual point where the belt would normally go, you'll find there's lots more of the belt. So get some isopropyl alcohol. I like to just pour it into the lid. Yep, so I put the lid there. Get some cotton swabs now. Okay, get some cotton buds. I've got a little toothpick there. We'll use that in a moment as well. And I'll show you what I'm going to do here. I'm just saturating around the motor there first initially. Around that part of the motor. Sorry, on this side we're going to just rub this and get all the rubber off that's on this side of the magnet. Now you will find you'll get little bits of rubber stuck to the actual electrical part of the motor as well. We'll clean that up in a moment, but as you can see around here, I'm just going to saturate all around here and just let it sit for a moment. And then we've got a toothpick, get that a little bit moistened with IPA as well, and then just kind of push in to work your way around the groove where the belt should sit, and it'll just mostly lift off. It will leave some residue behind, but if you get lucky, you'll get most of it off without too much effort. So just putting that IPA on it seems to solidify it a little bit, helps you get off bits of the belt. Now it looks like it's formed its own little mini belt. Now looking at the edge here, I can see there's still a little bit of black gunge in there, so we'll get the other side of this cotton swab and we'll work it around. And I'm kind of pushing in quite firmly because I'm trying to get the cotton swab to go right in. And we'll use the toothpick again and just pick around the edges. Sometimes I have noticed you get this kind of green residue. It's almost like mould. It's obviously just residue off the belt as well. Once you've managed to pick all that off, I then give it another little swab and wipe round, and it should be nice and shiny and spotless when you're finished. And this is the kind of level of cleaning you have to do in every component. So I know sometimes some of the videos I watched before I started restoring these myself, they were showing just ramming in a bit of cotton into the actual whole motor. But the motor's only 3 pieces, it's easy to take apart, and I'd recommend just doing that. So again, here you go, we've got the little coils here that get energised. You'll find at some point there will be some black gunge on that, and this time it's actually on the coil. Now, you're using isopropyl alcohol, it's pretty safe to use here. You're just going to give this a clean down, it'll soon flash off and dry, and as you can see, there was not much belt there, but sufficient to make the cotton swab go all black at the end, so give the whole thing a little bit of a clean. And that's the main takeaway from this video. Clean everything at least twice. Once it's properly cleaned, you will get the best experience out of this device. If you don't clean off every bit of rubber and there's any left behind, one, you'll suffer from quite bad wow and flutter, so it will sound kind of trembly and sort of wobbly audio. It won't sound great. And also that remnants of the old belt will stick to your new belt and cause your new belt to deteriorate, so you really need to give it a really good clean. So now we're going to move on to the main unit. We're going to look at these 2 capstans. That little gear next to the capstan, because that has belt running around it too, and we're just going to give the same treatment. We're going to absolutely saturate around the belt initially, or around the gears initially. Let it soak in for a few seconds, and then we're going to attack it with a toothpick again. So we're going to leave that end capstan because I'm pretty sure that one's pretty good, but we'll just work on this one first. Now I'm just shining a torch and I'm just having a look to see if I can spot any of the remaining belt. There's got to be some in there. So we'll move the IPA out of the way because I've got a habit of knocking that over and it leaves little alcohol stains everywhere. So yep, find a gap where you think there might be a gap in whatever remaining belt's there and just try and get under the edge of it. And if you do with the wooden toothpick, you'll find the belt will just slowly start to lift out as you rotate the capstan. As you can see, there's a big chunk of it there, look. And it's still pretty sticky, so I'm just going to get a set of tweezers and lift this carefully out of the way. There you go. And then we'll just carry on around the whole wheel. And like I said earlier, although we'll get all the belt out, when you start working your way around that capstan, you'll find there's like, you know, little bits of sort of green stuff there as well. You can wipe that off. Another good reason to have a piece of tissue paper or kitchen roll or something around about so you can just get in and clean this right out. And you really can't clean this too well. Just keep going at it until you're absolutely certain it's spotlessly clean. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. Now we'll move on to this other gear here. I don't think there was anything on this gear because we got lucky the whole belt came off, but we'll still go around anyway just in case there's any of that green residue still stuck behind. And this one actually looks pretty good. I've got pretty lucky so far with this unit. Generally speaking, the belts are in 1,000 little pieces and you spend quite a bit of time cleaning these up. Now, like I say, this video is about an hour long. I would say if you get lucky and you don't have to remove too much bits of belt, then it will only take you about an hour to refurbish one of these. But if there's quite a lot of gunge in there, and as you can see, these are spotless inside now. If there's any bits left behind, just take that extra time to clean it. It's definitely worth it. Okay, so next up, we're just going to go and clean. I'm cleaning this centre gear here and also gently rotating it just to see if there's any damage on it. It can crack along the face and then it would stop working. So again, we're just going to have a look at this. This is the clutch assembly. We're going to take that off. I like to clean this. There's a little paper clutch in there. Put that over to one side. And then the bottom part there is the clutch. That's still attached. You can't lift that off unless you lift off there's a tiny white, almost clear circlip, plastic circlip that's pushed on the end there. Don't take that off unless you have to. If you're fitting one of the brass gears from Fix Your Audio, that comes with a replacement circlip, a little red one. It's quite tricky to fit, so I would only do that if the original's damaged, and I would probably suggest replacing the original. I've had some good success with the plastic ones though. So yep, this is the other side of the clutch. Now I like to clean this with IPA and just really go round and round and round until you can hear the cotton bud squeaking as it's turning. That, you know, it's perfectly clean then. This clutch assembly really has to be spotlessly clean when you reassemble it, because if you don't, you're going to suffer again from bow and flutter, but you're also going to suffer from potentially the clutch slipping a little bit too much. And if it's slipping, then you're going to have either slow playback or inconsistent playback. Okay, so here we are, we're ready to fit the belts. So there's my belt set there, and that is a Chinese belt set. I have had some luck with these belts, but I would personally suggest you buy a set from Deck Tech or Manitree. So there's a large belt and a smaller belt. I like to fit the larger belt first, which goes from this plastic gear to the capstan over on the right or left as you look at it on screen just now, and try and fit it so there's no twists in it. It's not always easy, and you can take it off and refit it. That looks pretty good to me. So next up, we're going to fit the next belt, and to do that we have to get the motor partially reassembled. So before we put that on, we're going to have to do a little bit of lubrication. So at this point you need your syringe, if you've got one, for your light gear oil, and you want to put some in. Yeah, that's the gear oil I'm using, which is designed for fans. So I've got a little bit in this syringe. You put a little bit right in the centre point there. It's kind of tricky. I get a little bead of oil and then just push it in. That's that bit done. And then on the back, there's a little well here. We can put a little bit in there as well. Just get a little bit in the bottom. And then we can put this to one side. That's pretty much the only time you're going to need the oil now. And next up, you're going to need some white lithium grease. There's a couple of faces where you want to place this when you're assembling the motor. So we'll get out a toothpick And we've got a tiny limit on the end of the toothpick. You want to make sure it's not solidified a bit, so make sure you mash it around, just get it as soft as you can. Now a tiny bit on the top face here, try not to get it in the actual weld, so just a tiny bit on the top here. That's plenty. And then again on the motor. Now the motor magnets, they're both different. You know which one's which. The one with the little pin in it is the one that goes in the bottom. So around this little face, recessed face, you want to get a little bit in here as well. So if you have this lubricated, obviously a little bit of lubrication is going to mean that it's not going to drag, it's not going to cause any extra wow and flutter. It's also going to quieten this down somewhat. And the motor's actually pretty quiet on the Panasonic models. It's the gearing that's mostly noisy, but we'll quieten that down as well in a moment. Okay, so we should drop that into place. And that's spinning beautifully freely. So now we can get this belt on. So again, I like to put it from the capstan end first, and then you just drop it around. Now make sure when you put it on the motor, it goes onto the actual ring where it's meant to go. It can mount too high up, and then it won't actually turn when you put the top of the motor back together. So at this point, I put the energized part back together with the 3 little screws. And I generally like to put them in kind of like about half a turn, just so that they're holding the board in place, and then I give it a little wiggle just to make sure it's definitely centered, and then I finish screwing it together. And by tightened, I mean just barely tightened, just enough so that it won't come out. And then you drop the top of the motor back on place, and that's it. So this little gear here was from it's a clutch assembly gear, and I'm just squeezing it here with my finger, and it looks like there's no cracks in this. Now generally they crack, and when they crack they then pop off, and as you noticed when we first took it apart, it was sitting proud of the unit. So let's just put the clutch back together. So you put the paper bit back in next, and it's a kind of a cotton type paper. Then make sure you put the clutch plate back on the right way up, with the grooves facing down. I'm just going to clean the top of this because there's a little bit of grease sitting on the top of this. There we go. Let's just drop this back in place. You want to get it dropped in perfectly. Now it meshes with the gears around about it, so it should just click into place. Put your spring back in place, and now I'm going to show you what can go wrong. I'm reusing this clutch retainer, pushed back in place, clicks in. Now normally if it's weak it'll just pop straight back off, and that all looks good. So next up we're going to just check that the motor and everything's turning freely. So I'll turn it anti-clockwise, and you'll see that the little plunger on the right there closed up on the little relay, so we're just going to pop that back up, turn it, and you should see the mechanism will sweep all the way to the left. And then if you click it again, it should click back to the middle position. So worth always remembering, it goes to the right, which is the A side, I think, first, then it goes to the left, which is the B side, and then it goes back to the park in the middle where you can fast forward and rewind. Now you need to make sure the switch on your board is in the middle. So I always park the unit in the middle, and then make sure the switch is in the middle. And then when you put the board back down, that little switch fits into a little portion on this board, so that when the little relay at the right is energized and it clicks open, the sensor on the board knows which position it's in. Because I have seen people asking, why is it can only fast forward and rewind, it can't do anything else. So next up, I think we'll go around, we'll put a little bit of white grease on these gears. So I just use the turn the motor to turn the cogs around, and I just tap the tiniest amount of lithium grease onto these gear teeth. It does quieten down the unit a little bit, and you're not putting down so much that it's going to lead to any kind of drag or issues with playback. Because you notice when I took it apart, it was basically dry. So it really needs a small amount of grease on here, and it will quieten it down substantially. It's definitely a step I wouldn't skip. So just take your time. Now, the one thing you want to avoid is getting any lithium grease on the belts. If you do get any on the belts, you can clean them up with some isopropyl alcohol, but better to try and avoid that as best you can. And as you can see here, I did one gear, now I'm doing another gear, just the tiniest amount, because these gears all tend to mesh around with each other, and that will spread around that grease a little bit as well. But try and get as little as possible on each of the teethed areas. Okay, so next up, I think we're going to have to look at the other gear. There's one other gear here under this capstan that I would always suggest that you get some grease on, because I think this is one of the noisier gears in the unit. Now, it's difficult to put on because the belt is right there. I prefer to put the belt on first and then put some grease on it. There's maybe people that think it's easier going the other way, but yeah, that's the way I do it. So it doesn't matter if you get any on the case, because we're going to clean that up as we go. But you just want to get a little bit on that tooth of the gears, this gear along here. And again, I just make the motor work for me by just gently rotating it and putting a little bit of grease on. Now, it's worth doing this now because you're not planning on taking this apart again. So when we put the board on and we solder it in place, you're not going to get access to most of these gears. Certainly not the ones in the middle. That gear there you could get some access to, but generally speaking, you're not going to. And we're just going to grab a swab here. It's still got a little bit of IPA on it, and we're just going to clean off that little edge along there. Perfect. Okay, so now I think we're just about ready to put the board back in place. So be careful, this is quite a thin ribbon cable, but if you hold it firmly, it has got a little strengthened bit of plastic on one end. It should just push straight back in to the connector. And there we have it, straight in. Now you can flip the board over, make sure that switch is definitely centered up. This is a little tiny bit off there. And you want it to line up with the switch on the board. You give it a little bit of a wiggle, and it should just fall into place. There you see. So we'll push this together now, just because there's still a tiny bit of solder in here. It might take a few seconds. And don't forget to reattach your battery door before you start soldering it together. Next up, I put the 5 screws back in place just to hold that board in place. Not forgetting to put this circlip back on top of the motor. So I've forgotten that a couple of times, and it's quite annoying having to open up a unit again just to put that back in place. But putting the screws in, I just put them in any old order. This bottom left one is one of the more important ones. I think that one forms a bit of an earth point for the board, because I have noticed that sometimes if it's a little bit loose, you might have issues with it not powering up properly. So don't screw them in super tight, just have to go touch tight. If you screw them in too tight, they'll tend to shred the plastic they're going into, and then they'll never tighten up properly after that. Although it is soldered in place, so it's not such a big issue. Okay, so that's the screws in. Now you have to go turn your soldering iron back on, and you're going to move on to the next phase, or in my case, I'm just going to use the soldering iron because I forgot to turn it off. So my preference is I like to take a length of solder rather than trying to fiddle about unrolling it as I go. And I just work back in the exact same order as I took it apart. So I do all these points all the way along. And it's all a small amount of solder. It shouldn't take you long. Again, I'm using 340 degrees. And as you'll see, I'm only a few seconds at this. So at this point, I load up a little bit of solder on the bottom pad, and then I swipe it towards the back, because that's where it actually joins onto the sensor. So again, these points here, I like to get them done as quick as possible, because the pins can sink into the servo. So quick bit of solder there. And as you can see, these solder joints are pretty much as good as the originals. And I'm not an expert at soldering. I've had a bit of practice, because as you saw earlier in the video, I've done quite a few of these recently. But yep, when you get to these points here, you want to be really quick. You don't want to put too much solder on, because if you get any overlap at all in these pins, you're going to have issues with the motor not turning freely. And there we have it. So that's it. We've basically changed the belts, and now it's time to test the unit once we've reassembled it all. So, battery in. Oh, actually, what I like to do now, before we test it, is I like to put the side screws in place. And that's just to hold the hinge mechanism, because this is a sprung-loaded one. Not all of them are, but it's still worth doing it, because if you put these 2 screws in, it will stop the inner part of the case separating from the main logic board. And it becomes a right pain just getting it all to go back together. So just put them in there and this will all stay together now when you open it. So when you open it up, as you can see, it stays in one piece. If you don't put those screws in, it'll generally start coming apart as soon as you try to open it. So we'll put a cassette in just so that the tape sensor is activated. We'll pop a battery in and watch what happens next. Let's just turn this around and work out where the play button is. It doesn't actually say it on the board, but I like to just cross-reference the lid. So we'll press play. Oh yep, not forgetting that the hold switch is currently activated. So make sure you put that back in the not parked position and we'll press play. And did you see what just happened there? Yep, that clutch retaining spring and the clutch retainer itself have just disintegrated and gone flying into the ether. Now, I've bought units before and they look like that without that part there. So whoever's opened them up, or whoever sold them has opened them up. Now, as you can see, there's the clutch retainer. So even though that one was in one piece, it didn't stay in one piece for long. So it's definitely worth replacing it. And I would replace the spring as well because the springs are quite lightweight and they do tend to corrode a little bit. So if you buy the Chinese retainer, you get a spring included. If you buy the one from Fixture Audio, you don't get the spring. So you will be reusing your spring. You don't get a little circlip because you don't need it, because it's still, that's the one thing that will remain on your board. Once you've fitted a Fixture Audio one, there's no going back to the plastic ones because you can't get the little plastic circlips. I would suggest that the brass ones are definitely better quality, but these replacement white plastic ones, I've not had any fail yet, so I can't really comment. And they are ballpark similar price, and it's useful if you need to get a spring. So now if I press play, that should stay in place, and it does. As you can see here, it's running pretty well. It's running pretty quietly. Most of the noise at the moment is coming from that cassette because it's just an old junk cassette that I had. That I don't mind if it gets damaged. Okay, we're testing a few buttons here and everything seems to be working. Now, what I'm not going to show you today is how to adjust the tape speed. To do that, you really need an audio cassette with a test tone on it, and that's just a bit too much for this video today. So, on reassembly, what I like to do is I like to make sure all the switches are lined up with that little bit on the board. Now you see that? There's a little tab on the circuit board there to strengthen your switch. Now, I've seen quite a lot of these where someone has put the lid back on and they have actually broke off the little part on the little bit that sticks out at the end of the switch. So therefore you have a switch that can't be used anymore. So you need to line them up. So if you line them up with that little tab on the board and then your switches on your shell, you line them up, you should do no damage to those switches. They should line up perfectly. And I've just remembered we left those screws in, didn't we? So let's take these screws out, because we're not going to be opening the case until we've reassembled it. So we'll take these two side screws out. And what you should find is if you line up your shell properly, and I've got the lock in place, I've got the switches to the right in line with those tabs. Always fit the top half first, top edge first here. Make sure switches are in place. Once you push it down, you can check the switches and there you go. The whole thing just slides straight back together without any effort. Make sure your hold switch still works. And now it's time to just put the screws back in. I'm fairly confident we had it working already. And we'll test it with a proper test cassette in a moment. By test cassette, I mean just a audio cassette that has music on it. We'll see how that sounds. So if you've watched this video so far and you've reassembled your own personal stereo and you've replaced the belts and maybe some other parts and you thought this video was of use, please consider hitting that like, share and subscribe buttons. Subscribe to the channel. I will be doing more videos on the Panasonic RQ-SX line. It's a line I love. I'll probably do a lot more restorations, shorter restorations, and I actually sell some of these Walkmans on my eBay shop, so if you're interested, I'll post a link to that at some point. You've seen the level of effort I put into clean these. These are all generally very nice models that I work on. I work on some real stinkers, but I generally keep those ones for myself, because these ones are just too nice for me. Right, so let's pop the battery in. And yep, battery test is working. Let's pop out this rubbish cassette and put in a audio cassette at some point. Now actually, let's have a look at the capstans before we do anything. This is a more premium model and it has the solid capstans. Those metal pins that you see sitting out at the bottom. So we're going to have to clean all this as well. and we're going to clean the pinch rollers, which are those two little rollers at the back there, and the head. We'll just give them a going over with some more isopropyl alcohol and some more cotton buds. You will go through quite a lot of cotton buds whilst cleaning this. Okay, so I like to clean down in a diagonal. That helps the pinch roller turn, and you're cleaning every surface of it as you go. Now, there's a couple of things you should check. The pinch rollers haven't got a groove worn in them. That can often happen if these haven't been used for a very long time and the lid has been closed the whole time. The pinch roller and the capstan are pressed together, so if there's any damage to your pinch rollers, you'll need to see about replacing them. Now, I'm not doing that today. I'm just going to clean this pinch roller, and you should see it gets quite dirty as I'm cleaning across the surface and rotating it at the same time. And I tried to twist around the cotton bud as well, just to give a clean face as I'm turning around. You can see it's discoloured a bit there. Now, some of these, you'll clean the pinch rollers and they'll be absolutely filthy afterwards. They'll be absolutely black. But this one's just a little bit grey. It's not too bad. I think this unit was probably particularly loved. It's definitely in very good condition. Now, one way to test if your pinch roller's still good, you can just press your nail against it. If it leaves a mark, then chances are your pinch roller's gone soft. If it doesn't leave any kind of mark, it maybe leaves a slight mark that will bounce back pretty quickly. If it's gone hard, it feels hard to touch, probably needs changed as well. And if there's any big worn grooves in it, again, it'll probably need changed. However, giving them a bit of a clean up can sometimes revive a pinch roller that's just gone a little bit tired with age, but not got any real damage on it. So we're just going to clean these up just now. And that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to clean the head now. Now I have got a head cleaning cassette as well that has a demagnetizer and stuff built into it. I'll use that later on, but we're just going to give this an initial clean. We'll give the capstans a quick wipe round. Now these are rotating parts, so just cleaning the front and back. It should rotate round as you're cleaning them. Now it's suggested that you can oil these as well, but I've not really found the need to do that. If you have a particularly noisy unit, then you would. So after cleaning those capstans, I want to show you a capstan on another RQ-SX model, and this is one with the rubber inserts. You can see that on the capstan pin there. It has two rubber inserts on each one, and you really do not want to clean them with isopropyl alcohol because it tends to rot them away. So, as you can see, the left one here looks pretty good. The one on the right looks pretty worn. So, clean them with just a damp cotton bud. They are not the best capstans, to be honest. You can butcher a worn out unit that has the solid ones and put them into a model that has the rubber coated ones. I haven't done that yet myself, but I may do that in a future video. So stick around if you want to see that. Okay, so press and play, and as you can hear, it's very quiet. Yep, I'm pretty pleased with that. So I think what we'll do now is we will plug a little speaker in. Just a low cost thing to test, and yeah, that's working not too bad. It may be a little bit slow. Now, like I say, I'll adjust that with a test cassette, and I'll save that for another video. Okay, so let's check fast forwards working, and that seems to be working fine. And it's playing the A side and the B side perfectly. So there you have it. About an hour, and you can bring one of these lovely old Walkmans back to life. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you'll stick around, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.